This is like Blair Witch Project. I'm all alone in this office. Everything's empty. And it's gonna be scary. Okay, walking down in this very dark and ominous staircase, setting the mood for the story. Oh, did you hear that? Just kidding, there was nothing. Oh, the exit sign's right here. Okay, let's see what's down here. All right, here we go. It's just an outside, there's nothing going on, but we can pretend because I'm writing a story. I just wrote a story actually, where a lot of bad things happen. The world is kind of dying, people are dying, and in the middle of it all, there's an FBI agent. His name is Jim Price. And he's trying to figure out what's going on because things aren't adding up. Nothing's adding up. What's happening to the world? Why are people being murdered? Why are people disappearing? It's an interesting mystery. Let's figure it out together. Let's go into this creepy little booth here. All right. Here we are in this creepy booth. I don't have a name for this story yet. However, I'm gonna write more of it. I just wrote 5,000 words. This is a 5,000 word story. You get to listen to it here today. I'm super excited about it. It's the first time I've ever written fear for an entire audience to read. My whole goal and purpose is to make you feel scared, to bring you chills. If it accomplishes that, then the story has done what it's supposed to do. The right mixture of music and sound and anticipation and a whole bunch of other elements that I put in there specifically to create an eerie feeling to make you get the chills as you're listening to it. So let's dive in and listen to this amazing, terrible, awful story. Dun dun dun.
It was the birds. That's when we knew something was wrong. They were leaving. Then it was the bees. They were just gone. No more apples, cherries, or thousands of different types of fruits and vegetables. The world changed in a season. Then things got worse. The air became sick. Scientists said the hydrogen in the air was increasing dramatically. Breathing became difficult. People said the earth was dying. They blamed it all on humanity, saying we polluted ourselves to extinction. As awful as that sounds, I'd rather believe that than the truth. I've seen them in the night skies. I've watched them drop things into the ocean. The truth is, the earth isn't dying at all. It's being terraformed, and we're being replaced. Jeremy Banther, deceased. Item number ZA587, Anchorage FBI Evidence Archives. Anchorage, Alaska. "Welcome back, Price," said Pete with a grim smile. Special Agent Price swept his hand across his forehead to remove the sweat, but was surprised to feel nothing on his hands. He wasn't perspiring. This was just humidity. A headache began to form and he winced in pain. "What the hell is wrong with this place, Pete?" he said, taking off his heavy winter coat. "Isn't Alaska supposed to be cold as hell in December?" "Same as everywhere else, I guess. 0 snowfall this year. Didn't you read your memo?" Price tossed his coat into the rental car, folded his umbrella, ducked below the caution tape, and then approached the coroner. He looked at the scene before him and frowned. Nearly 2 hours after the crime, the officers were only now installing the rain shields. Whatever evidence was left had likely already been destroyed. "He's the same as the others," said Pete, pointing at the body on the street. "Single bullet wound to the head, left temple. What are we at now? 6 in 10 days?" 7, actually, said Price.
"I'm sorry about the mess," said the coroner. "I told the officers to put up the rain guards, but they took their time. Bunch of lazy bastards, if you ask me."
Price looked at the body. It was just like the others. The rain picked up its pace, and he opened the umbrella again. 7 dead in 10 days. But not 7 random people. If they had been random, the local precincts would have handled this. These were 7 related deaths. At least that was his theory so far. He had spotted the connection after the first 3 murders, and then pulled rank with the cyber division at the FBI to commandeer the cases. The first death had been a hacker who went by the alias of Ghostfire. He had recently infiltrated the World Health Organization and released classified test results on the web. The second murder was of a schoolteacher and father of 2 living on the Oregon coast. One of his students found his body on the campus where he taught. His house had been ransacked. Then there was a YouTuber, a conspiracy theorist, and even a teenage kid. The last 2 were scientists. Death by calculated precision. Not death, no. Assassination. Price coughed, breathed deeply, and then coughed even harder. And I thought it was bad back in Phoenix. I can barely breathe. Pete tossed Price a water bottle.
"Drink up. You're dehydrated."
Water is the last thing I want right now. I'm sick of water.
"You need to drink it. Humidity actually causes dehydration. I know that sounds backwards, but there's nowhere for your sweat to go. Your body doesn't know that, though, and since it can't cool off, it keeps trying to perspire."
Pete pointed down the street toward the docks and the shoreline.
"It's especially bad in all the coastal areas."
Price nodded reluctantly and took a swig. That did feel better. He took a step closer to the body and knelt on the street. No evidence, no accident, no crime of passion, just another corpse. He pulled out his phone and opened the preliminary findings. Jeremy Banther, age 37, separated from his wife with 2 kids in grade school. He was an FAA administrator at the Fire Island airfield. "Your work done here, Pete?" he asked.
"Yep. Want to go grab dinner? Get some authentic Alaskan king salmon?"
"No thanks, Pete. Look, you should go home. This place feels sick."
"My flight leaves tonight. No big deal."
Pete looked around and then sighed.
"But it's a little sad, you know, not seeing any snow. It's my first time in Anchorage, and I've got nothing to report back to Lucy except a dead body and more rain."
Price nodded and then watched Pete jump in his own rental car and then take off. He spent the next few hours working with the officers to clean up the scene. Forensics had done their work, and now it was time for him to do his. Though, just like the others, this case wasn't going to be solved. At least, not the way it was supposed to be. The murders were calculated assassinations. The key wasn't to find the murderer, but to discover the motive. Agent Price drove 15 minutes to Banther's home. It was a middle-class suburban neighborhood. The area had an eerie feeling to it. No, that wasn't it. It felt sick, too, just like everything else around here. The lawns of the homes were overgrown and vibrantly green. What once had been perfectly manicured lawns were now miniature forests of shrubbery and grass. Most of the homes had their lights off, the cars missing from the driveways. Though it was only 3:45 p.m., it was dark outside, courtesy of living just beneath the Arctic Circle. As he drove, the lights of the car beamed across an empty house. There was red spray paint across the garage. "The end is coming," it said. Price shivered and the hairs on his flesh stood erect. He was now feeling eager to follow Pete to the airport. But of course, there was a job to do. Eventually, he pulled into the driveway of Banther's home. He stared through the windshield as the rain pounded into the car like a demon with 1,000 sledgehammers. The noise was ominous and his headache returned. He looked upwards toward the second floor of the home and his stomach dropped to the floor. The windows had been boarded up, and not just a little. There were multiple layers of rotting wood and jagged planks. He looked toward the front door and saw a similar scene. Normally, the local PD would have ripped them down and done their investigative work, but all of this was his problem now. He had been the one to pull jurisdiction. The homes to the left and right of Banther's looked abandoned, and Price sat in the car for a few more minutes until the beating of the rain couldn't keep him in anymore. Taking a step onto the driveway, he cursed aloud. The water was at his ankles. He groaned and then pulled out his flashlight. The rain was getting him soaked, but the umbrella wasn't practical right now. The front porch was filled with stacks of lumber and buckets of nails.
Price approached the door and then knocked loudly. "Anyone home? This is Special Agent Price with the FBI. If anyone's home, please make yourself known." Moments passed, and then Price took a breath and nodded. It was empty, as expected. He would have to find a different entrance. His light found purchase on a wooden fence next to the garage door. There seemed to be a gate in the backyard. He walked to the gate, reached behind, and unlocked the latch. He pushed the door, but it wouldn't budge. Something was blocking it. Price holstered his flashlight, grabbed the top of the fence, and then hoisted himself up. As he reached the top, his foot slipped and he tumbled down into the backyard. He hit the grass with a small splash as water soaked his entire body. "Crap," he said. Pushing himself up, he examined the gate. There were wooden planks edged against it to keep it from opening. He kicked them down. That wasn't an obstacle he wanted to encounter if he had to make a quick escape. The backyard was small and fenced. There was a small doghouse in the northwest corner and a chain extending into the grass, but no dog. That was to be expected. Lots of dogs had been disappearing these days, or running away, as the news liked to say. Running to higher ground, probably. There were towering trees surrounding the rear of the property. That old wooden fence gave him a slight measure of comfort. It was the only defense against those awful, dark trees. It was like the forest wanted to pull you in, eat you up, and take you to a watery grave. He shuddered at the thought and then turned back toward the house. The windows here, too, had been boarded up. "What the hell?" he whispered as he made his way to the back door. "What were you so afraid of, buddy?" Price pulled out the key he procured from Banther's body and unlocked the door. Taking a deep breath, he contemplated on just leaving. The voice of reason in the back of his head told him to just get in the car and go. He didn't have to finish the case. He could hand it back to the local authorities any time. He could just go back home and relax. Enjoy life. Enjoy life until the next murder happened, said his other voice. Enjoy life until life can't be enjoyed anymore, it continued. It's true that Phoenix had received more rainfall in the last 2 months than the previous 6 years combined. And it wasn't just Phoenix, it was everywhere. Homes and towns along major coastlines had been abandoned due to rising sea levels. It was a scientific abnormality, at least that is what the experts on the TV said. The sea level should have decreased with all of the rainfall, but it didn't. The ocean continued to rise as the water continued to fall. They called it an abnormality, but also stated it was nothing to be concerned about, that the planet had a way of recovering and would make minor adjustments every few thousand years. No one would say what everyone already knew, though, that what was happening was bad, incredibly bad. "Sorry, Jim," he said to himself, "but we've got a job to do." Price put the small flashlight back into his belt, unholstered his Glock, and then turned on the pistol's light attachment. He turned the door handle and then slowly pushed it open. "Federal agent entering the home," he yelled. "If anyone is here, make yourself known now." There was an ominous silence. He now wished someone had been home. Hell, he would have been happy to hear the sound of a meth head stumbling down the stairs and pleading not to be arrested, just like his old days as a detective before he joined the bureau. He took a step inside and the wooden floorboards creaked in agony. He closed the door behind him and sighed as he looked at the rows of locks on the door. There were 16 of them. Clearly, when Banther was at home, he didn't want any visitors. The house reeked of musty dampness. There was probably quite a bit of mold here, too. How could anyone live like this? It made sense that the neighbors had fled. Anchorage would soon be swallowed up like so many other towns. But swallowed up by what? It wasn't just the rain or the ocean, he was sure of it. It was like something bigger and far more terrible was orchestrating it all, like a demented puppet master who was pulling the strings far from above. Yes, that felt right, or rather closer to the truth. The kitchen was littered with dirty dishes and trash. When the man ran out of plates, he turned to frozen dinners, and when the trash can filled up, the kitchen became the dump. It was clear something had kept Banther inside. Even taking out the garbage was too risky of a task, apparently. Price walked to the wall and flicked on the light switch. No lights. This was expected. To the right was a stairway that led to the second level. To the left was the living room. It was nearly as cluttered as the kitchen, except this time full of papers. There were thousands of them. Standing next to the coffee table, he reached down and grabbed a manila envelope. It had a news printout from Yahoo, and the title read, "Conspiracy theorist says he knows why the dogs are disappearing." He tossed it down and unfolded a large map from the couch. It was a map of the world. There were markings in red indelible ink all over it. Circles drawn around certain cities like Seattle and Miami in the USA, and down to places in South America that he couldn't even pronounce. Talcahuano in Chile and Buenos Aires in Argentina. There were others in Russia and Asia and all throughout the world. His heart suddenly skipped a beat as his light panned the map. He looked at Alaska and saw a small circle right next to Anchorage. He peered closer to read the name of the location. Fire Island, it said. He pulled out his smartphone and looked it up. The island was close and only a few miles from the mainland. "What are you trying to tell me here, Banther?" he said aloud. Scrolling on his phone's screen, he found the Wikipedia page for Fire Island. There had once been a military base there in the 50s. Later, it had been torn down. Nowadays, the forested island was full of wind turbines and a single airfield owned and operated by the FAA. "Did you work there, buddy?" he said. Price continued to rummage through all of the papers. There were articles from scientific journals and from health organizations. There were clippings and cutouts of murders and disappearances. There was an entire stack of papers that started with phrases like, "The president denies," and "Scientists refuse," and "There is no evidence to support." It went on and on. Sure, Banther didn't seem like the most organized person by looking at his house, but he surely knew how to categorize information. His heart began to beat faster and faster as he read through the documents. So much death, so much misinformation. What was happening here? The deathly pounding of the rain seemed to disappear, and he fell deep into thought. He had eventually made his own pile, slowly adding one paper after another until he stopped at 6. A lump developed in his throat as he stared down at the documents. 6 papers and 6 deaths. Banther had somehow collected the names of the same string of murders that Price was investigating. "In the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses," he said aloud, thinking of that old scripture from Sunday school. "But what are we witnessing, Banther?" he said again. Suddenly, a loud slam echoed throughout the silent room. Was that a door? Price's heart jumped from his chest and he drew his weapon straight. The sound seemed to have come from the second-story level just above him. The head-pounding sounds of rain returned in full force as he breathed deeply. He paused for a few minutes, remaining alert, but heard nothing. He started to lower his weapon when the floor shifted above him with a moaning creak. He wasn't alone, he was sure of that now. He had made himself known earlier and no one had responded. Whoever was here didn't want to be found. Price faced the stairs and slowly made his way toward them, pointing his weapon and flashlight forward. Taking his first step on the stairs, he winced as the plank squeaked out in terror, as if he had just crushed its face with his foot. The thumping of his heart felt like the roaring of a thunder within. Raising his weapon up the stairway, he slowly moved to the top. The stench of mold reminded him of a decaying corpse as he reached the second floor. The gun light revealed a hallway with 3 doors. The first door on the left was within arm's reach and open. Then there was another door to the right. It too was opened. At the rear of the long and dark hallway was a third door, which was closed. It stood directly above where he had been below in the living room. Someone had been there. They had closed the door. No, they had slammed it with fury. Maybe whoever was here wasn't actually trying to hide. He was being baited, and this most certainly was a trap. "It's not too late to turn back, Jim," said that familiar voice. "You know where this door leads, my friend. But there's another door just downstairs that will take you to a much better place." "No," he whispered. "There is only one door." He took his first step into the hallway, and it screamed in fury. There would be no stealth. Whoever was here knew that Price was here. No point in trying to hide that. As he shuffled forward, he quickly turned his light to the first door. It was the bedroom of a child. Actually, 2 children, he thought as he looked at the bunk bed. The room was relatively undisturbed, except for stacks of scattered papers that were likely recently added. It was clear from threat. Turning back toward the hallway, the rain began to pound harder, and then came a crack and a reverberating thunder, though this time it wasn't from his heart, but actually earth-shaking thunder. The dark and heavy storm was growing more fierce. Jim's breath was frantic as he quickly surveyed the second door. It was some type of craft room with an old sewing machine, perhaps the remnants of a wife too, long departed. Why had his family left? They didn't seem to take much with them. You know why they left, Jim. They left to escape the very thing you are chasing right now. The craft room was clear, and he moved steadily toward the final door. The thunder boomed again, and Jim winced as the shivers pierced his spine like 1,000 blades. Creak after creak, he moved closer to the end of the hall. The door was now in arm's reach. His light flooded the area, and he knew whatever was on the other side was standing right there. He tried to open the door, but his hand froze in terror. Why couldn't he open it? After all, he was the one holding the weapon. He was the one with the authority. He had arrested hundreds in his career, from snot-nosed hackers to dangerous digital pedophiles. He had his close shaves, but never had he felt the type of terror that was pouring through his body at this moment. The voice in his head remained silent. He had come too far, he supposed. Price moved his ear to the door and closed his eyes, taking a breath. There was nothing, not a sound, just the hellfire of a monsoon growing outside. No, that wasn't true. He could hear it now as he held his breath. Someone was standing there, breathing. His heart sank and his eyes went wide. He took a step back and then placed his hands on the door. It was humid and wet, as if someone had scrubbed the carcass of a slug against it. He winced, but continued to slowly turn the handle. As he did, the door suddenly swung open with fury, and he stumbled forward. Price tripped on something and then hit the ground hard, crushing his face into the damp wood floor. His weapon flew from his hands as the world went black for a moment. He gasped out suddenly as he came to. He had lost his wind. The light from his weapon was pointing against the corner of the room, next to a large bed. It was about 6 feet away. He would need to get to it fast. He put his hands to the floor in push-up position, getting ready to leap to his feet, when his body froze again. He couldn't move. Then he could hear it. The breathing. It was right in front of him, and it wasn't natural. It was more like a soft gurgling, like someone's throat had been ripped out and they were trying to catch their last few breaths of air. Aside from the rain, the room was silent. Price wished, perhaps, that it would thunder once more to give any relief against this awful breathing that was drawing closer. Why hadn't his assailant attacked yet? It didn't matter. He needed to move. Jim envisioned the compact pistol strapped to his ankle. He only needed to turn his body slightly to reach it. Why did his arms feel so heavy? It was like a dream, where something is just out of reach, and you know that you can reach it, but for some reason, it's impossible. He closed his eyes and stretched his arm toward his foot with all of his strength. His arm moved, if even only slightly. The gurgling grew louder, and something shuffled on the floor, closer to his head. "Please," he groaned within. "Almost there." Then something touched him on the cheek. He dared not open his eyes. It was wet and cool to the touch, but then it changed in an instant. His head started to feel hot, and his throat turned dry. The heat moved down his neck and into his body. He couldn't breathe, not because there wasn't any air, but because his throat felt so dry, like the moisture was being sucked from his body. He needed water, right now. He was thirsty. All that mattered right now was water. "No," said the voice. "Focus, Jim." The gun. His fingers were on the grip. Price mustered all of his strength and squeezed the grip of the weapon. There was no way he would have the strength to aim it. As the heat turned into a raging fire, he wrapped his index finger around the trigger and squeezed with all of his strength. There was a deafening blast, and then a shriek near his head. Suddenly, he could move again. His strength had completely returned. He grabbed the compact pistol with force and swung it in front of him and fired. Blast after blast, he shot into the dark. If something moved, he couldn't hear it as he fired blindly. Then there was a scream unlike anything he had ever heard before, and the sound of heavy footsteps. Thump, thump, thump. Then came the crash. The sound of wood, glass, and the ripping of flesh came from behind him. He turned around and saw an open window. No, it hadn't been opened. Something had leapt through it. He raced to the ledge and then aimed his weapon outside. But there was nothing. There was only rain and water below. The water that he had grown to hate over the last months. The water he so desperately wanted to drink right now. The rain then began to slow down to a trickle as he peered into the dark forested neighborhood. In the distance was a lone light, a home where someone lived. Someone who said, "No, I'm not going to leave." That said, "I'm going to see this thing through." That gave Jim courage. His heart rate normalized and he reached for his phone. He would need to call this in. He had fired his weapon, but the phone was missing. He walked over to his primary weapon and picked it up, reholstering the compact ankle weapon. After a moment of searching with the light, he found his phone on the floor. He picked it up and it sprang to life, adding more illumination to the room. There was a picture of an island full of trees and the words, "Fire Island," written across the top. "I warned you, Jim," said the voice, "but it's too late now. You've got to see this thing through." "Yes," he said aloud. "You're right." Price liked it when he agreed with himself. It meant it was a sure thing. He tapped the phone app, but then paused. No, he wouldn't call this in. No one would help him anyway. Half of his division hardly even showed up for work these days. He would need to solve this on his own, just as he started it on his own. "Looks like we're going to Fire Island," he said with resolve.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to the story, sticking with me to the end. If you like what you're hearing, please click that subscribe button right now and click the little bell so you can get notified whenever the new stories come out, because I'm doing this every single week. And put comments below. Tell me what you think, what story suggestions you have. Let me know what you want. I make this just for you, and I will change things around just for you. So thanks everyone again. Subscribe now, and I'll see you next time.